Every pirate treasure ever found before 1985 was a fraud, every single one. 300 years of maps with red X marks, 300 years of History Channel specials and theme park gift shops, and not one verified gold coin from a verified pirate ship had ever been pulled from the ocean floor. The entire mythology of buried treasure rests on a single passage in a single novel published in 1883. Robert Louis Stevenson made it up. Then a diving instructor from Cape Cod proved everyone wrong with a bronze bell the size of a soup pot. The bell read, "The Whydah Gally 1716." 5 words stamped into metal before the ship had ever left port. And what came up after the bell was stranger and more valuable than any treasure chest in any novel, because the Whydah was not just a pirate ship. She started her life as a slave ship, she ended it as a democracy, and somewhere in between, the richest pirate who ever lived sailed her straight into a nor'easter 2 days short of the woman he was coming home to marry. To understand why the wreck matters, you need to understand what she was built to do. The Whydah Gally was commissioned in London in 1715 and launched in early 1716. Her owner was Sir Humphrey Morice, a Whig member of Parliament, a man who would go on to become governor of the Bank of England and, by the blunt admission of his own contemporaries, the foremost London slave merchant of his day. Morice ran at least 6 slave ships. He named 4 of them after his daughters, his sister, and his wives: the Anne, the Catherine, the Sarah, the Judith. Across his career, he trafficked roughly 30,000 enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. He died in 1731, officially of gout, but almost certainly by his own hand when his embezzlement of £29,000 from the Bank of England was about to become public. The ship he built for this purpose was 110 feet long, 3-masted, square-rigged, with oar ports cut into the hull so rowers could supplement the sails in calm water. That is what the word galley means. She carried 18 cannons and could make 13 knots, which was genuinely fast for anything afloat in 1716, and her name was borrowed from the place she was designed to visit, Whydah, the slave trading port on the coast of what is now Benin. The English spelled it Whydah, so the ship carried her mission in her name before she ever left the Thames. Captain Lawrence Prince, a Dutch buccaneer turned merchant whom Maurice had personally appointed, sailed her out of London in early 1716 on the standard triangular route. London to West Africa to the Caribbean, Caribbean back to London. In West Africa, Prince traded English manufactured goods, cloth, guns, iron, brandy for approximately 367 captive human beings, plus Akan gold jewelry, gold dust, and ivory. The 367 were loaded into the same hold where the gold would later sit in pirate char sacks. By the time the Whydah reached Jamaica, 312 of those 367 were still alive. 55 people had died chained in her hold during the Middle Passage, a mortality rate of about 15%, which was considered acceptable by the standards of the day. Prince sold the survivors in Port Royal, converted the proceeds into silver, indigo, sugar, and spices, and turned the ship north for the homeward leg. He never made it. In late February 1717, somewhere near Long Island in the Bahamas, a 2-ship pirate fleet spotted the homebound Whydah. The lead vessel was a 26-gun galley called the Sultana, commanded by a 27-year-old Devonshire sailor with long black hair tied back with a satin bow. His name was Samuel Bellamy. Everyone called him Black Sam. Prince ran. Bellamy chased. The pursuit lasted 3 days. When the pirates finally closed range and fired a single shot, across the Whydah's bow, Prince gave up. He had 18 guns and 50 men, enough to put up a real fight, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, and he may already have known what happened next when you cooperated with this particular pirate. Bellamy claimed the Whydah as his new flagship. Bellamy had been sailing the Sultana, which was itself a perfectly good 26-gun galley. The Whydah was bigger, faster, and freshly provisioned from Jamaica, so he took her. And then he gave Captain Prince the Sultana as a going-away present, a fully armed 26-gun galley. He threw in 20 pounds of silver and gold on top of it, roughly 3,600 pounds in today's money. This is not how piracy works. Pirates did not hand their captives a warship of comparable firepower and wished them well. The closest equivalent is a highwayman robbing your coach and then giving you a fresh horse. Several of Prince's crew looked at the arrangement, looked at each other, and asked to stay with the pirates. Bellamy was born around February 23, 1689, probably in Hittisley, Devon, the youngest of 6 children born to tenant farmers. His mother died shortly after his birth. He went to sea at 13 during the War of the Spanish Succession and was a seasoned deep-water sailor by the time he was 23. Around 1714, he turned up on Cape Cod near the town of Eastham, supposedly to look up English relatives. He was tall, dark-haired, and refused to wear the powdered wigs that were standard dress for anyone with social ambitions. He wore his black hair long and tied back, which is where the nickname Black Sam probably came from. He carried 4 dueling pistols and wore expensive black coats. By every account, he was magnetic, quick-witted, and deeply annoyed by the class structure of the British Empire. Cape Cod legend says he fell in love with a 15-year-old Eastham girl named Maria Hallett. Beautiful. From a respectable Puritan family, completely forbidden. He promised to come back rich enough to marry her and left to dive on the 1715 Spanish Plate Fleet wrecks off Florida. While he was gone, the story says she discovered she was pregnant. The baby died. The town shunned her. She was exiled to a hut on the dunes near Wellfleet. When Bellamy's ship went down 2 years later within sight of that same coastline, the people of Wellfleet said she had summoned the storm. They called her the Witch of Wellfleet. People still leave offerings at the supposed site of her hut on Marconi Beach. Modern historians, Eric J. Dolin among them, point out that zero contemporary documentation of Maria Hallett exists. No church record, no court filing about a dead infant, no record of any Hallett living in Eastham at the time. The entire love story may be 19th century folklore, it probably is. Cape Cod has always been good at turning its dead into legends, and a drowned pirate sailing home to a pregnant girl is about as good a legend as any coastline has ever produced. But real or not, it is the legend of Cape Cod, and Marconi Beach is part of the Cape Cod National Seashore today, and if you go there, someone will tell you about Maria Hallett whether you ask or not. The treasure diving expedition to the Spanish wrecks failed. Bellamy and his partner, a man named Paulsgrave Williams, found nothing, and there is an irony buried inside the failure that most people miss. Many of the silver coins Bellamy later plundered from merchant ships were themselves salvaged from those same 1715 Spanish wrecks. Other people had got into the silver first. Other people had sold it, spent it, loaded it onto merchant ships, and Bellamy took it from them on the open water. The treasure he could not dive for, he stole second-hand. Williams is the single unlikeliest pirate in the Atlantic. He was born in Newport, Rhode Island in 1676. His father was the Attorney General of Rhode Island. Williams himself was a married man with children and a successful goldsmith and jeweler in Boston. He was about 39 years old when he met a 26-year-old drifter on Cape Cod and decided to become a pirate. They served under the experienced Captain Benjamin Hornigold, whose crew included a young Edward Teach, later known as Blackbeard. In June 1716, the crew voted Hornigold out because he refused to attack English ships. They elected Bellamy captain. He was 27. What followed was the most concentrated spree of maritime robbery in the Golden Age. Between the summer of 1716 and his death in April 1717, Bellamy and his fleet captured at least 53 vessels. That works out to roughly 1 capture every week for a year. He beat Henry Avery, Bartholomew Roberts, and Blackbeard for the all-time pirate wealth top spot. Forbes calculated his total haul at the equivalent of about $120 million in modern currency. Other recent estimates pushed the figure above $179 million. His entire career as captain lasted less than 12 months. The man who sank richer than any pirate in history had been doing the job for less time than it takes to finish a college semester abroad. He and his fleet operated for a time out of Blanco Islet near Tortola in the British Virgin Islands. The islet was renamed Bellamy Cay after him. That name persists on navigation charts today. He worked the Caribbean, the shipping lanes off the Carolinas, the approaches to New England. He took British ships, French ships, Spanish ships, Dutch ships, and colonial American vessels. From every prize, the crew took coined money, weapons, tools, food, sails, rope, and any crew member who wanted to volunteer. The Whydah, by April 1717, was not a pirate ship in the way most people imagine one. She was a floating supply depot with 28 cannons and more gold than most colonial treasuries. The most famous pirate speech ever recorded comes from this period. The General History of the Pirates, published by Charles Johnson in 1724, gives Bellamy's words after the crew of the Whydah voted to burn the sloop of a Captain Beer who had declined to join them. Bellamy is said to have told Beer, "Damn ye, you are a sneaking puppy, and so are all those who will submit to be governed by laws which rich men have made for their own security. They vilify us, the scoundrels do, when there is only this difference. They rob the poor under the cover of law, and we plunder the rich under the protection of our own courage. I am a free prince, and I have as much authority to make war on the whole world as he who has 100 sail of ships at sea and an army of 100,000 men in the field." Whether Bellamy spoke those exact words is unknowable, but the speech predates Marx by 130 years, and it remains one of the earliest clear articulations of class warfare in the English language. For a pirate captain who lived to 28 and left no other written record, that is not a bad epitaph. The crew that sailed under him is the most studied pirate company of the Golden Age, and the picture that emerges from the research looks nothing like Treasure Island. About 146 men were aboard the Whydah when she went down. They were English, Welsh, Scottish, Irish, French, Dutch, Swedish, Spanish, Portuguese, African, Native American, and at least one Mosquito Coast Indian. Kenneth J. Kincor, who spent 27 years as project historian of Expedition Whydah until his death in 2013, estimated that between 30 and 50 of the crew were of African descent. About a third. Many of them were freed slaves taken from captured slave ships. Their articles, the Pirate Code, guaranteed an equal vote on all major decisions regardless of race. Every man received an equal share of plunder. Injured crew members received compensation, 600 pieces of eight for the loss of a right arm, for instance. The captain was elected and could be deposed at any time. Kincor said it plainly. The deck of a pirate ship was the most empowering place for blacks within the 18th century white man's world. This was a former slave ship. The hold that had carried 367 captive Africans across the Atlantic now carried the silver those Africans had been sold for. The same hold, the same chain rings bolted to the bulkheads, and on the deck above, freed Africans voted alongside Englishmen and Dutchmen on where to sail and what to do with the money. Marcus Rediker and Colin Woodard have both argued, building on Kincor's work, that this crew was something close to the first multiracial democracy in the Western Hemisphere, almost a century before the US Constitution. On November 9, 1716, before Bellamy had even captured the Whydah, his crew took the Antiguan sloop Bonetta between St. Croix and the Bahamas. The Bonetta was a passenger ship sailing from Jamaica to Antigua. Among her passengers were a woman and her young son. His name was John King, and he was somewhere between 8 and 11 years old. The boy refused to leave with his mother when the pirates released the Bonetta after 15 days. According to the sworn deposition of the Bonetta's commander, John King demanded to join the pirates and threatened to kill himself and then to kill his mother if anyone tried to stop him. He stayed with Bellamy through the Sultana, through the capture of the Whydah, and into the storm of April 26, 1717. He drowned with the rest. In 1989, Barry Clifford's dive team raised the mineral concretion from the wreck site. Nobody paid it much attention. It was one lump among hundreds. When someone finally broke it open, years later it contained a small leather shoe, a French silk stocking, and an 11-inch fibula, a calf bone. The artifacts sat in storage for 17 years before anyone understood what they were looking at. The concretion containing the youngest pirate in recorded history had been sitting on a museum shelf while tourists walked past it. In 2006, John DeBry of the Center for Historical Archaeology and David R. Hunt, a Smithsonian physical anthropologist, examined the bone and the shoe and determined that the bone belonged to a child between 8 and 11 years old. The shoe was 2 inches wide. child-sized, upper-class craftsmanship. The stocking was high-end French silk, the kind of thing a wealthy passenger's child would wear. John King was the only child aboard. He is the youngest pirate in recorded history. His leg bone is in a museum on Cape Cod. By April 1717, the Whydah's hold was carrying 180 sacks of gold and silver, approximately 50 pounds each, divided so that each man's share was sealed in his own bag. Between 4.5 and 5 short tons of precious metal, Spanish pieces of 8 from the 1715 Plate Fleet salvage market, Peruvian silver from the Piracy Mint, Portuguese gold joes, Arabian gold taken from Indian Ocean trade prizes, at least 400 pieces of West African Akan gold work from the original Whydah cargo, beads, nuggets, jewelry fragments and casting debris from what is now Ghana. About 200 brass manila bracelets, the currency rings used to buy slaves in the first place, roughly 60 cannons, pistols, muskets, cutlasses, and navigation instruments. The Akan gold is the single most scientifically important part of the entire collection. That collection is now the largest and most precisely dated assemblage of Akan gold work in the world, all from before April 1717, none of it remelted. The gold includes lost wax cast pendants and the very fine Akan threadwork bead style, techniques that had been perfected in the forests of what is now Ghana for centuries before any European ever saw West Africa. In a 2026 study published in NPJ Heritage Science, researchers used portable X-ray fluorescence and scanning electron microscopy to test about 24 of those gold artifacts. The gold composition ranged from 73.5 to 96.7% pure, perfectly matching the natural ore deposits of Ghana. That result demolishes a centuries-old European accusation that Akan merchants deliberately debased their gold, a slander that had been used to justify paying lower prices on the slave coast for 300 years. The Whydah gold is the cleanest direct evidence we have of pre-colonial Akan metallurgy, and the European traders who claimed the gold was fake were either liars or fools or both. A credible theory holds that some of it was personal jewelry the enslaved Africans had been wearing or hiding when they were captured. Akan culture wore gold heavily. A captured person did not always have time to be stripped of it. Small pendants, hammered sheet, gold beads that survived the Middle Passage on or in their bodies. The gold from the slave coast crossed the Atlantic on a slave ship, ended up on a pirate ship, sank into Cape Cod sand, and came back up 300 years later to prove that the people who made it had been telling the truth all along. On the afternoon of April 26, 1717, somewhere off Nantucket, Bellamy's four-ship fleet captured the Marianne, a pink carrying more than 7,000 gallons of Madeira wine from the Azores, plus the Fisher, loaded with deer hides and tobacco. Bellamy put a small prize crew on the Marianne. The pirates broke into the Madeira casks and drank through the afternoon and into the evening. By dusk the wind dropped and a heavy fog settled over the water. The four ships lost sight of each other. Then the wind came back from the northeast and kept building. By midnight it was a full nor'easter, 70 miles per hour, 30 to 40 foot seas. Around midnight the Whydah struck a sandbar bow first in 16 feet of water, roughly 500 feet from the beach at what is now Marconi Beach, Wellfleet, Cape Cod, less than 2 football fields from dry land. She was about 13 miles east of Wellfleet when the wind shifted, well within range of safe water under normal conditions, but the back-veering northeast wind drove her directly onto the lee shore. A lee shore in a nor'easter is the one place no amount of seamanship can save you. The ship goes where the wind pushes it, and the wind was pushing straight onto sand. Modern reconstructions describe the storm as one of the most severe nor'easters in New England history, a late April extratropical cyclone with the power to snap 3 masts like kindling. Within 15 minutes of grounding, her mast did exactly that, and the ship rolled onto her side and settled capsized in 30 feet of water. The 4.5 tons of gold and silver, the 60 cannons, and 144 of the 146 men aboard went to the bottom. Wreckage spread for 4 miles along the coast. Over the next several days, the bodies of more than 100 pirates washed ashore. Locals stripped them of clothing and whatever coins were still in their pockets. Two men survived the Whydah herself. Thomas Davis, a Welsh ship's carpenter who had been forced into pirate service, swam to shore. John Julian, a 16-year-old Mosquito Indian from the Mosquito Coast, who had served as the ship's pilot, made it to the beach. 7 more survived from the Mary Ann, which wrecked on a separate sandbar near Eastham. Those 7 had been so drunk on the captured Madeira that when their ship hit the bar, they stayed aboard drinking until daylight. They walked into a tavern in Eastham the next morning and were arrested by local authorities. They still smelled of wine. William survived because he was not there. In mid-April, he had stopped at Block Island to visit his mother and sisters, a pirate quartermaster taking a detour to see Mom. It saved his life. The survivors and the Mary Ann crew were hauled to Boston and locked in the Old Stone Prison. Massachusetts Governor Samuel Shute convened a Court of Admiralty at the Old State House. The trial opened October 18, 1717, and sentence came down 4 days later. John Julian was never tried. As a Native American, he was not considered to fall under English law. He was sold at slave auction. Thomas Davis was acquitted after he and his Welsh shipmates testified that he had been forced aboard and had tried to escape. Thomas South was also acquitted as a forced man. The remaining 6, John Brown, Thomas Baker, Hendrik Quintor, Peter Cornelius Hoof, John Schuyen, and Simon van Voorst, were convicted and sentenced to hang. Hendrik Quintor was a free black man of African and Dutch descent, born in Amsterdam in 1692. He had been captured from a Spanish brig by French pirates and chosen to join the account. Peter Cornelius Hoof was Swedish, 34 years old. Thomas Baker was a Dutch tailor. Simon van Voorst was a New Yorker. John Schuyen was French. John Brown was Jamaican-born. 6 men from 6 different countries convicted together. Cotton Mather visited them every day in prison. Mather was the most famous Puritan minister in New England, the son of Increase Mather and the intellectual architect of the Salem witch trials 25 years earlier. The same man who had helped send 20 people to their deaths in Salem in 1692 and 1693 was now walking pirates to the gallows, Bible in hand, insisting they repent before the crowd. He recorded their conversations in painstaking detail. On November 15, 1717, the 6 were rowed across Boston Harbor to Charlestown Ferry. The official execution site for piracy was always between the high and low water marks, signifying Admiralty jurisdiction. Mather preached the entire way across. Thousands watched from the shore. The hangings were the climactic public spectacle of the entire Whydah affair, the 18th century equivalent of a season finale, and Mather had no intention of letting the moment pass without extracting maximum moral instruction from it. He published the whole affair as a pamphlet that same year, Instructions to the Living from the Condition of the Dead. It survives in the Evans Early American Imprints collection and contains direct quotes, place names, the prisoners' own descriptions of their pirate articles, and Mather's moralizing commentary. It is the single most important primary source on the Whydah crew. John Julian's life after the wreck is its own separate horror. The Boston court sold him at auction. He became the property of John Quincy of Braintree, Massachusetts. John Quincy's great-grandson would become President John Quincy Adams, a famous abolitionist who almost certainly never knew that his family's household had once included a teenage pirate purchased at a slave auction. Julian was, by the colonists' own descriptions, unmanageable. He escaped repeatedly. After being resold, he tried again, and during one escape attempt, he killed a bounty hunter. He was tried for murder and hanged on March 26, 1733, 16 years after he had survived the wreck. He was 32 years old. The boy who piloted the Whydah through the Windward Passage got 16 more years of captivity and a rope. 6 days after the wreck, Governor Shute dispatched Captain Cyprian Southack to Cape Cod to recover what he could for the crown. Southack was already a minor celebrity. London-born, Boston resident from 1685, former commander of the Massachusetts-based station ship, and the first chartmaker in America. He arrived on May 3, 1717, hired a whaleboat at Provincetown, threaded it through a tidal cut called Jeremiah's Gutter along the Eastham-Orleans line, and reached Wellfleet by water. What he found was a mess. The wreck site was already swarming with locals who had been stripping bodies and looting wreckage for a week. the townspeople were openly hostile to the Crown's salvage claim. On Cape Cod, what washed ashore belonged to whoever picked it up. That custom was older than any of the laws Southack was trying to enforce, and nobody on the Cape had any interest in letting a Boston official walk off with their salvage. Southack managed to bury 102 of the 144 bodies but recovered almost no treasure. He wrote despairingly into Chute, the riches with the guns would be buried in the sand. He was right. Within a few storms, the wreck was completely covered. Within a generation, it was forgotten. Southack did one thing that turned out to matter more than any salvage. He drew a chart of the New England coast from New York to Cape Breton, and in an inset of Cape Cod, he marked the exact spot where the Whydah went down. A small drawing of a ship and the words "the Whydah pirate ship." The chart was reissued in 1734 and again later. It is a real treasure map drawn by a government cartographer, and it turned out to be accurate 267 years after he drew it. Barry Clifford grew up on Martha's Vineyard listening to his uncle Bill Carr tell stories about a pirate ship buried somewhere off Wellfleet. Clifford, born 1945 in Brockton, Massachusetts, became a salvage diver, and the story about the pirate ship never quite let go of him. It was the kind of obsession that sounds romantic when it pays off and delusional when it does not. In 1981, he began studying historical records, including a copy of Southack's 1717 chart. He started searching in the summer of 1982 with sonar, magnetometers, and a small crew, working the waters off Marconi Beach on a budget that was more stubbornness than funding. The wreck site lay under 14 feet of seawater and another 5 feet of sand, almost in plain sight, a couple hundred yards off Marconi Beach, exactly where Southack's map said it would be. Cape Cod's shifting sands had buried and uncovered the wreckage repeatedly across 267 years. A government cartographer in a powdered wig had gotten the location right in 1717, and nobody had bothered to check until a diving instructor from Brockton took him seriously. In 1984, Clifford's team made the formal discovery: cannons, coins, the first mineral concretions. Massachusetts immediately disputed his claim under the 1973 Underwater Archaeological Resources Act, and the Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources demanded 25% of the fine plus regulatory oversight. The legal battle ran until 1988, when Clifford's Federal Admiralty claim prevailed. The clincher came in the fall of 1985. Divers raised an encrusted bronze bell. In the lab, as conservators cleaned away centuries of marine growth, the inscription emerged letter by letter through the concretion: the Whydah Gally 1716. That is the only direct inscription authentication of a Golden Age pirate shipwreck that exists anywhere on Earth. By comparison, the Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard's ship, was found off Beaufort, North Carolina in 1996 and is almost certainly his vessel, but the bell recovered from that wreck is dated 1709 and inscribed H.S. Maria, not the ship's name. The identification rests on circumstantial evidence: location, period, armament, the mix of artifacts. Every other purported pirate wreck, Sam Roberts' Royal Fortune, Calico Jack's sloops, all of them remain speculation. The Whydah bell is it. A second confirming artifact, a small inscribed brass placard with the same text, came up in 2013. More than 200,000 individual artifacts have been recovered from the wreck site to date. Cannons, some still loaded with shot and powder when raised, thousands of silver coins, the Akan gold work, the brass manila currency rings, pistols, muskets, cutlasses, navigational instruments, John King's bone, stocking, and shoe. In 2018 and 2021, 6 skeletons in mineral concretions were excavated. A confirmed Bellamy descendant in England, located by researcher Casey Sherman in 2018, provided DNA for comparison against one of the skeletons. The match was negative. Bellamy himself has not been found. Hundreds of concretions remain unopened in the museum lab, some weighing as much as 13,000 pounds. Less than 10% of what is believed to have been aboard the Whydah has been brought to the surface. The 180 sealed pirate shore sacks, the bulk of the 4.5 tons of silver, are mostly still missing. Thousands of coins have come up, tons of coins have not. Cape Codders pocketed much of it in 1717, and the rest lies under sand offshore. people still walk Wellfleet Beach with metal detectors. The Whydah wreck site lies inside Cape Cod National Seashore and is the only pirate ship ever named as a National Historic Landmark candidate by NOAA. The collection lives at the Whydah Pirate Museum in West Yarmouth, Cape Cod, where visitors can touch actual silver coins from the wreck. The National Geographic Real Pirates exhibition, built from King Core and Clifford's work, has been seen by over 2 million people. The hull itself is still down there, and Cape Cod sandbars keep burying and uncovering sections with every storm season. New artifacts wash up after nor'easters. The site is still actively excavated each summer. The Whydah is not a closed case. She is barely half open. 3 centuries of pirate mythology, and only one ship was ever proven real. She started as a slave ship, became a democracy, and went down with more gold than anyone had ever carried on the Atlantic. The boy who begged to join her crew died in 30 feet of water, half a mile from a beach. The man who piloted her through the storm survived and spent the rest of his short life in chains. The gold from the slave coast came back on the same ship, and 300 years later it proved that the Europeans who bought it had been lying about its purity all along. Bellamy's bones are still down there somewhere, sealed in a concretion the size of a small car, waiting for someone to crack it open. The bell already told us he was real. The rest is just a matter of sand.